They don't want you to know who Enoch really was, because his story destroys everything they taught you about God, death, and divinity. Long before the Bible was curated and edited into what we now call holy, Enoch was already walking with the divine. He didn't just speak to God, he walked with him. And then he vanished. Not because he died, but because he ascended. No funeral, no grave, just gone. But that's only the beginning. His story, hidden in ancient texts and stripped from mainstream religion, is a spiritual time bomb. One that threatens to unravel the control systems built on fear, limitation, and obedience. Enoch wasn't a myth. He was the prototype, a human who transcended flesh. And if they had told you his full story, you'd start asking questions that religion, science, and society are not prepared to answer. But now that you're here, it's time to see what they tried to bury. In the book of Genesis, among the long list of patriarchs and prophets, there is one line that disrupts everything. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. That's it. No explanation, no further detail. Just a line that suggests something so profound, it should have shattered theology. Enoch did not die. He was taken. And yet, despite this spiritual anomaly, most people raised in religious traditions never heard a word about him beyond that single sentence. Why? Because if you dig deeper into who Enoch really was, you find a story too powerful to be left in the open. Enoch lived 365 years, a number already symbolic, mirroring the days of the solar year. And during that time, he became something more than human. Unlike other prophets who merely spoke about God, Enoch walked with him. He wasn't just receiving commandments, he was being invited into a relationship with the divine that defied earthly limitation. According to ancient texts, Enoch didn't just walk with God in the metaphorical sense, he was elevated, taken through the heavens, and shown the architecture of the universe itself. And eventually, he was transformed into something that no longer belonged to this realm. But that version of Enoch, the one who journeys through the heavens, the one who becomes light, isn't in the Bible most people read. It's in a book they removed, the Book of Enoch. An ancient text once revered by early Jews and Christians, later deemed too dangerous, too mystical, too uncontrollable to be included in the canon. So it was erased, left out, buried, but not forgotten. Those who've read the Book of Enoch describe a narrative unlike anything else in religious literature. He's not just a prophet. He's an interdimensional witness, a traveler between worlds. He is taken by angels into realms beyond our comprehension and shown visions of judgment, cosmic law, the rise and fall of civilizations, and the fate of souls. He becomes the bridge between the earthly and the divine. And that's what makes Enoch so dangerous to the system. He doesn't need a priest. He doesn't need a doctrine. He doesn't operate through an institution. His awakening came through direct experience. That's something no religious authority wants widely known. That divinity is not something you earn by obedience, but something you remember by awakening. Some of what I'm about to share is too controversial for YouTube. We go deeper inside Insights Academy, our free newsletter, link in the description. You'll also receive a free ebook of the Kybalion for a limited time. Now imagine this. A man ascending to another plane without tasting death, a mortal turned immortal, and not by bloodline, not by sacrifice, but by frequency, by tuning his being to a higher realm. That's what the mystics, the sages, and the seekers across all ancient traditions have whispered about. That's the secret hidden in plain sight. Ascension is real. Enlightenment is not just poetic, it's cellular, energetic, and possible. And Enoch may have been the first documented case. His story didn't need a cross or a resurrection. It didn't require a spectacle, just a quiet departure, a divine transformation, and a legacy they've tried to erase for over 2,000 years. Because if people knew that a man could ascend without dying, could evolve without permission, could commune with God without going through a religious institution, it would break the system. Enoch didn't just walk with God, he left the blueprint behind. There's a reason you weren't taught about the Book of Enoch in church or school. It wasn't left out by mistake. It was deliberately excluded. This isn't some fringe theory. It's a documented truth. The Book of Enoch was once widely known, widely read, and even referenced in canonical scripture. In the New Testament, the Book of Jude directly quotes Enoch, yet the book itself was banned from the biblical canon. Why would a text so clearly influential be removed? The answer is simple. It revealed too much. The Book of Enoch isn't some vague spiritual writing filled with riddles and metaphors. It's detailed, explicit, and unapologetically cosmic. It names names. It tells stories of angels who defied divine law. It exposes a rebellion in the heavens that spilled onto earth. And it places Enoch not as a mere observer, but as a chosen intermediary, a man brought into the higher realms to witness and record what few humans were ever meant to see. At the center of the book are the Watchers, fallen angels who descended to earth and began to interfere with humanity. They taught mankind things that were never meant to be taught. Weaponry, sorcery, astrology, seduction, forbidden knowledge. These were not benign guides. They were beings who crossed boundaries, corrupted creation, and altered the course of human history. The result? The birth of the Nephilim, giants, hybrids, beings of immense power and chaos that roamed the earth and defiled it. And as the world fell deeper into decay, it was Enoch who was sent to deliver the message of judgment. Think about what that means. A sacred text, older than most of the Bible, describing a war between divine forces, a contamination of human DNA, and a cosmic court where even angels are held accountable. This isn't mythology. It's spiritual history that was too dangerous for the ruling powers to allow. Because if people understood that humanity had been tampered with, that divine beings once walked among us and altered our development, then everything changes. Religion, origin stories, divine authority, all of it is up for re-evaluation. The early church fathers knew this. They feared what the Book of Enoch would awaken in people. Not fear of God, but curiosity. Not blind faith, but awareness. And most of all, the terrifying possibility that ordinary humans, just like Enoch, could have direct access to the divine without needing a middleman. That's why they buried the book. Not because it was false, but because it was uncontrollable. And yet, despite centuries of suppression, the Book of Enoch never truly vanished. It survived through Ethiopian Christianity, through ancient scholars, through mystics and Gnostics, who saw in Enoch a mirror of what we could all become. It was passed in whispers, protected in shadows, and now it's resurfacing because people are ready again, ready to remember. Reading the Book of Enoch is not like reading scripture. It's more like decoding a cosmic transmission. You begin to see the layers, how the heavens are structured, how beings of light and darkness operate, and how the soul's journey is mapped long before we're even born. Enoch wasn't writing poetry. He was documenting dimensional law. And perhaps that's the most threatening truth of all, that buried within this banned book is not just history, but prophecy. A warning, yes, but also a key. A key to understanding our origins, our potential, and the battle still happening all around us. They told you the Bible was complete, but they left out the book that reveals the architecture behind it all. The story of Enoch wasn't lost. It was hidden, because it unlocks something they can't afford for you to remember. Enoch wasn't just a holy man. He was a traveler, someone who crossed the veil between dimensions and returned with truths that rewrite everything we think we know about life, death, and the structure of the cosmos. He didn't receive visions the way other prophets did. He didn't just hear a voice or dream a dream. He was taken, carried by beings of light, angels, watchers, higher intelligences, and shown the mechanics of reality firsthand. He wrote not from imagination, but from experience. The Book of Enoch tells us he was taken through multiple levels of heaven, each realm more complex, more radiant, and more incomprehensible than the last. He speaks of crystalline landscapes, of towers of fire and light, of beings that defy language. He describes a cosmic hierarchy, forces that maintain the universe, administer justice, record time, and watch over souls. These weren't metaphors. They were encounters. Enoch was being educated, not by humans, not by scriptures, but by the architecture of the divine itself. It's no coincidence that ancient mystical traditions, from Kabbalah to Hermeticism, from the Egyptian Book of the Dead to Eastern philosophies, all speak of layered heavens, ascending planes, and gatekeepers of cosmic law. Enoch saw what the mystics have always hinted at, that the physical world is just the surface, a ripple in a far deeper ocean of existence. And we are not separate from it, we're woven into it. Enoch's role was to see it, record it, and return with a map. But the journey changed him. Enoch didn't just visit the heavens, he evolved. The more time he spent among celestial beings, the more he began to resemble them, not in form, but in essence. His frequency shifted, his understanding expanded. He became something else, something other. And that transformation culminated in the most mysterious twist of all, his elevation into Metatron. Now, most people outside of mystical traditions have never heard of Metatron. But in ancient esoteric texts, Metatron is one of the highest archangels, sitting beside the throne of God, keeper of divine records, scribe of the eternal. And that being, according to tradition, was once human, was once Enoch. Think about what that means. A man, a mortal, was transformed into an immortal, transcendent entity, not through death, but through conscious evolution, through alignment, through initiation. He wasn't chosen because he was perfect. He was chosen because he was ready. He accepted the journey. He said yes to the unknown. And that choice, his willingness to go where others wouldn't, was what allowed him to become what others couldn't. This idea isn't foreign. Many spiritual traditions hold the belief that humans can ascend, that there is a path of light, a stairway within the self, that leads to something greater. Jesus, Buddha, Thoth, Krishna all spoke of transcending the flesh, of reaching a state beyond suffering, beyond limitation. Enoch may have been one of the first to walk that path and leave behind breadcrumbs for the rest of us. That's why he's been buried. Because Enoch doesn't just tell a story. He delivers a threat to every system that says you're small, you're weak, you're dependent. His life is a spiritual rebellion against helplessness. He proved that the divine isn't reserved for deities, that a human can become something more, not through bloodlines, not through dogma, but through awakening, through remembering. Enoch shattered the barrier between human and divine, and in doing so, he exposed the truth that they don't want you to realize. That barrier was never real to begin with. Long before the Great Flood, before the 10 Commandments, before kings and prophets, there was a moment, a fracture in heaven's order, that changed the course of humanity. The Book of Enoch tells us of the Watchers, a group of angels tasked with observing the earth. But they didn't just watch. They intervened. They crossed the line. And that decision would corrupt the very essence of human life. According to the text, these angels descended to earth and, driven by desire, took human women as partners. The union between celestial beings and earthly flesh created something unnatural, giants, called the Nephilim. Not just physically enormous, but spiritually unstable. These were hybrid creatures born of divine power and mortal imperfection. And they began to wreak havoc on the world. Violence, chaos, domination. Their existence polluted the balance of nature and corrupted the spiritual frequency of the planet. But it didn't stop there. The Watchers also brought knowledge. They taught humans secrets that were never meant to be revealed. Metallurgy, warfare, enchantments, astrology, cosmetic manipulation, and seduction. This wasn't divine guidance. It was forbidden technology, a kind of spiritual colonization. They accelerated the evolution of human power without the foundation of wisdom to hold it. The result was destruction, not enlightenment. And Enoch? He was chosen to stand in between. He was sent to warn the Watchers, to tell them that their time of influence was ending and that judgment was coming. Imagine that. A human tasked with delivering a divine decree to celestial beings. The courage, the clarity, the energy required to do that. Enoch wasn't just respected by heaven. He was trusted. He was the messenger of accountability in a time of cosmic betrayal. The punishment was severe. The Watchers were bound and cast into the depths, their influence cut off, their children, those born of spiritual and fleshly rebellion, left to die in the cleansing flood that would reset the earth. But even in that destruction, the scars remained, and Enoch wrote it all down, not just as a record of what happened, but as a warning, a prophecy, because the story of the Watchers isn't just about the past, it's a cycle, one that repeats when knowledge is divorced from wisdom, when power is pursued without purpose, when divine boundaries are crossed in arrogance rather than understanding. Look at the world today. Humanity chasing artificial intelligence without spiritual grounding, playing with genetic modification like it's a toy, altering consciousness with chemicals while severing the soul from its source. The echoes of the Watchers are everywhere. The corruption Enoch warned about has returned, just dressed in silicon instead of stone. That's why the Book of Enoch feels less like ancient mythology and more like a mirror. He wasn't just telling us what had happened, he was showing us what would happen again if we didn't awaken. The Watchers were not inherently evil, but their fall came from misusing divine knowledge without divine alignment. That same temptation is alive in our world today, promising progress while hiding its cost. And here's the twist that most overlook. Enoch wasn't just warning humanity, he was advocating for it. Even as he stood before the throne of God, delivering messages of judgment to the angels, he also pleaded for mercy on behalf of mankind. He saw our potential. He believed in our capacity to rise. But he knew that without remembrance, without wisdom, we would fall prey to the same forces again. The story of the Watchers is not about monsters. It's about misdirection. It's about what happens when divine beings lose their way and take humanity with them. It's a tale of seduction, not just by beauty or desire, but by power. And unless we learn from it, we're doomed to repeat it. The Watchers came once. But if Enoch's writings are right, they never truly left. They simply changed form. And now, their influence creeps back into the modern world, quiet, disguised, but just as dangerous. History, as you've been taught, is incomplete by design. It isn't just missing dates or forgotten empires, it's been edited, filtered, and rewritten to keep certain truths buried. Enoch's writings aren't just spiritual, they are historical. They describe a version of humanity's past that challenges the very timeline we've been told to accept. And if even half of it is true, then our origins are far older, far more advanced, and far more entangled with divine forces than we've been led to believe. In the Book of Enoch, we see glimpses of a world that predates known civilization, a time when humans were already engaged with celestial beings, receiving knowledge, navigating consequences, and witnessing events that don't show up in any textbook. The descriptions of the earth, the heavens, the stars, and the Watchers hint at a structured universe where every law has a spiritual counterpart. Enoch wasn't observing primitive people. He was describing a culture with access to the stars, to cosmic cycles, to an advanced understanding that modern science is only beginning to rediscover. And this isn't isolated to one culture or one text. The echoes of Enoch's story stretch across continents. In ancient Sumerian texts, we read about the Anunnaki, beings from the sky who came down and influenced humanity. In Mesoamerican mythology, feathered serpents like Quetzalcoatl are said to have brought divine wisdom and were later feared or cast out. In Egypt, Thoth is described as a scribe of the gods, a being of wisdom and magic. All of these stories, separated by oceans and millennia, follow the same rhythm: divine visitors, forbidden knowledge, a fall, a flood, and a reset. Enoch doesn't contradict these myths. He connects them. What if Enoch wasn't just a prophet, but a witness to a forgotten chapter of human history, a chapter that was deliberately erased? His records suggest that humanity was once spiritually advanced, not just technologically but energetically, that we once lived in alignment with celestial cycles, understood the soul's path, and had open communication with higher realms. And then something changed. Corruption spread. The divine frequency was distorted, civilizations fell, and history, as we know it, began with amnesia. The flood isn't just a story about rain. It's about memory being wiped clean. A reset, not just of land, but of legacy. And Enoch was the thread connecting what came before to what would come after. He was the bridge, which is why his story was never meant to survive in public hands, because remembering him means remembering what we were capable of and what was taken from us. Mainstream historians will tell you civilization began 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, but how do you explain structures like Göbekli Tepe, older than the pyramids, filled with astronomical alignments and sacred geometry? How do you explain the universal flood myths found in every major culture? How do you explain ancient knowledge of celestial mechanics, encoded in temples long before telescopes? Enoch's writings were not fiction. They were fragments of a deeper truth, a hidden lineage of human potential, buried beneath layers of doctrine, empire, and silence. And the reason his story was removed from the biblical canon is because it doesn't support the version of humanity that leaves you powerless, waiting, disconnected. His story tells you we were once more, that we can be again. And that's what they fear. Not your curiosity, but your remembrance. Because once you remember who you were, the world they've built around your forgetfulness begins to crack. You stop obeying. You stop consuming. You start questioning. You start listening not to the noise outside, but to the ancient signal still pulsing inside your soul. Enoch is more than a historical figure. He's a key, a time capsule encoded in language, myth, and memory. He reminds us that what was buried can be unearthed, and what was erased can be rewritten. Not just in history books, but in who we are becoming. If you believe death is the end, you've already accepted a lie so deeply woven into our world that even questioning it sounds insane. But what if death, as we understand it, isn't a law? It's a limitation placed on us by systems that benefit from our fear. Enoch's story dismantles the finality of death. He wasn't buried, wasn't mourned, and wasn't laid to rest. He was taken, alive, transformed, ascended. And if that's true, then death is not a door that closes, but one that opens. The real question is, to what? Mainstream religion teaches that death is the price of sin, that we live once, die, and await judgment. But Enoch's life doesn't fit that model. He lived righteously and never died. Not because he earned some divine exemption, but because he embodied a frequency that allowed him to transition while still in the flesh. His story implies that the laws governing life and death are far more fluid than we're told, that the soul isn't locked into this physical plane, but can ascend, consciously, deliberately, awake. The Book of Enoch describes multiple levels of heaven, structured dimensions of existence, and each one reveals more about the soul's journey beyond the body. Enoch wasn't afraid of death because he understood it. He saw what waited beyond. He interacted with it, and that understanding removed the fear that chains most people to lives of quiet desperation. If you remove fear of death, you remove the greatest weapon used to keep you obedient. He speaks of places where souls are stored, where energy is balanced, where time itself functions differently. He describes mechanisms of divine justice and order, rules not made by men in robes, but by the architecture of creation itself. These aren't allegories, they're coordinates. And when you study them, not with blind belief but open awareness, you begin to see a pattern. Death is not the end of life, it's the end of illusion. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. What if we were never meant to die in the way we do now? What if premature aging, decay, and suffering aren't part of the natural human experience, but the result of spiritual disconnection? Enoch didn't die because he lived in alignment with the divine rhythm. He was not perfect, but he was aware. He lived consciously, not mechanically. That awareness raised his vibration to a level where transition was not destruction, but metamorphosis. Ancient cultures all over the world echo this idea. The Egyptians spoke of the Ka and the Ba, spiritual components of the self that survived and traveled beyond death. Tibetan mystics spoke of the rainbow body, a transformation of flesh into light through deep spiritual practice. Indigenous cultures knew of the soul's journey to other realms through sacred rituals and initiations. Enoch's story doesn't contradict these, it confirms them. In modern terms, we might call it consciousness expansion. In ancient terms, it was ascension. Either way, it means one thing: the body is not the final form. Death is not the final event. It's a doorway into another level of being. And Enoch didn't stumble through it. He walked through it, fully awake. If you knew that death was just a shift, would you live differently? Would you still waste your time chasing approval, fearing failure, playing roles that were never yours to begin with? Or would you start preparing not for the end, but for the next beginning? Enoch's story isn't about escaping death. It's about understanding it, reclaiming it, reframing it from a punishment into a transition. And that's what makes his disappearance so powerful. It wasn't a trick. It wasn't magic. It was mastery. And if he could do it, it means others can too. Not by mimicking rituals, but by remembering who and what we truly are. Because death, when stripped of fear, becomes something else entirely. It becomes freedom. The story of Enoch didn't fade away, it was buried. Not because it lacked truth, but because it revealed too much of it. And those who claim to represent the divine have always feared what they cannot control. The early religious authorities understood something that many modern believers do not: that Enoch's account dismantles the gatekeeping mechanisms of organized religion. It strips away the need for priests, rituals, and intermediaries. It makes the divine personal, immediate, and direct. And that is dangerous to any system built on obedience. When the councils met to determine what would become the official Bible, they weren't simply curating scripture. They were editing reality. The Book of Enoch was well known, even referenced in the Book of Jude, but it was left out. Not because it was discredited, but because it didn't serve the narrative. It presented a cosmos that was too vast, too complex, too autonomous. It didn't paint humanity as helpless sinners in need of constant rescue. It presented us as beings of divine potential, caught in a cosmic drama, but fully capable of transcendence. That narrative undermines control. If people truly believed they could access higher realms, commune with celestial beings, and understand divine law directly, then religion becomes unnecessary. Not spirituality, religion, the institution, the hierarchy, the business model. Control through doctrine only works if people are disconnected from the source. Enoch reconnected them. That's why mystics were called heretics, why Gnostics were hunted, why esoteric knowledge was driven underground. It's why so much of the ancient world's wisdom, hermetic texts, sacred geometry, celestial mathematics, was repackaged as superstition, because it empowered the individual. And empowerment has always been a threat to empires of the spirit. When you read Enoch's writings, you're not reading mythology. You're reading a manual, one that outlines how the soul operates, how dimensions function, how judgment isn't about eternal damnation, but about energetic alignment. These truths were too radical, too liberating, so they were buried under centuries of dogma. And it's still happening today. The same forces that silenced Enoch's story continue to shape spiritual narratives to keep people passive. Heaven is always distant. Salvation is always conditional. The divine is always out of reach, unless you go through the system they created. But Enoch's life stands in quiet defiance of all that. He didn't seek permission to ascend. He didn't follow a religious checklist. He aligned himself with truth, and he was taken into light. This is why his transformation into Metatron is so profound. It's not just a mystical flourish, it's a statement. A man becoming an archangel means the divide between human and divine is not as wide as we've been taught. It means the sacred isn't a category you're either born into or denied. It's a potential waiting to be activated. And let's not forget, Enoch wasn't a rebel. He didn't rage against God. He didn't preach destruction. He lived in harmony with divine law. He obeyed the highest order, not the one created by institutions, but the one woven into the fabric of the universe itself. That's the real threat. Not rebellion, but alignment. Because a person in alignment doesn't need control, doesn't need guilt, doesn't need saving. And that makes them uncontrollable. When religions stripped Enoch from their texts, they weren't just silencing a prophet. They were cutting out the part of the story that reminded us of our own divinity. The part that said, "You don't need to die to rise." The part that whispered, "You were never just flesh." So now, here we are, with Enoch's story rising again, not in temples or institutions, but in the hearts of seekers who are no longer satisfied with half-truths. You don't need a robe or a title to reclaim what was taken. You just need to remember. Remember that long before doctrine, there was knowing. Long before religion, there was light. And long before fear, there was Enoch, walking with God, unafraid and fully awake. There's a reason Enoch's story is re-emerging now. Not decades ago, not centuries ago, now in this exact moment of human history, where the world feels like it's teetering on the edge of something irreversible, where technology is accelerating faster than wisdom, where spiritual emptiness is disguised as modern progress, and where truth is becoming harder to recognize beneath layers of noise and manipulation. Enoch's voice, once buried, is starting to echo again. And that's not an accident, it's a calling. Enoch lived in a time when humanity was being reshaped by forces beyond its understanding. The Watchers descended, bringing forbidden knowledge and creating chaos under the illusion of advancement. Today we face a similar invasion, not from the skies, but from our own hands. Artificial intelligence, digital surveillance, genetic engineering, consciousness manipulation, it's all unfolding in front of us, wrapped in convenience, speed, and innovation. But behind the sleek packaging, there's a deeper question. Are we ascending, or are we being misled? That's why Enoch's story matters more than ever, because we're once again on the threshold of transformation. But unlike Enoch, who was guided by divine order, we're surrounded by synthetic frequencies, spiritual disconnection, and systems designed to distract rather than awaken. His journey reminds us that the only safe path forward is the inner one, the path of remembrance, intuition, and alignment. Enoch wasn't chosen because he was lucky. He wasn't a passive recipient of wisdom. He prepared himself. He tuned into the higher laws. He became a vessel for truth, not by force, but by choice. And that choice is still available. It always has been. But you won't find it on your screen. You won't find it in the next app or podcast or trending meditation challenge. You'll find it when you unplug long enough to hear the frequency beneath the noise, the one that's been calling you since before you were born. The institutions won't tell you this, because they can't control a person who listens to their own soul. They can't market to someone who finds fulfillment without consumption. They can't manipulate someone who remembers that their body is sacred, their thoughts are energy, and their spirit is eternal. Enoch didn't just witness the truth, he became it. And that is what terrifies those who profit from a world of forgetfulness. Look at the chaos around you, not as proof of failure, but as the sign of a system cracking. People are awakening, not en masse, but in waves, quietly, powerfully. And once a mind sees beyond the veil, it cannot unsee it. The illusions lose their grip, the fear stops working, and suddenly, one soul becomes a light in the dark. Enoch was that light once. Now it's your turn. The ancient texts speak of a return, a restoration of what was lost, not through war, not through prophecy, through awareness, through choosing to rise. That's what Enoch's story has always been about. Not escape, not salvation, elevation. He showed us what's possible when we remember who we are and walk in alignment with something higher than power, ego, or fear. And if we are indeed reliving that ancient cycle, if the Watchers have returned in another form, through data, control, and digital seduction, then now more than ever, we must choose differently. We must choose to evolve from within, not upgrade from without. We must become the bridge between the divine and the human, just like Enoch, not waiting to be taken, but preparing ourselves to return. Enoch's message isn't just for mystics and scholars. It's for the ordinary soul with extraordinary memory. The one who's felt there's more than this world, even if they couldn't explain why. The one who hears the silence behind the noise. The one who's ready, not to be saved, but to remember. This isn't about belief, it's about resonance. And if you've made it this far, you're not just curious, you're being called. We've been taught to see stories like Enoch's as distant myths, curiosities from another time, wrapped in sacred language and sealed off behind the glass of history. But that's the final illusion. Because Enoch's journey was never meant to be worshipped, it was meant to be repeated. His path wasn't about proving how holy one man could become. It was a message written in the soul of every seeker. You were made for more. Enoch walked with God not because he was favored, but because he remembered the way. He lived with a clarity that cut through the distractions of his time, through the noise, through the confusion, through the influence of beings who had abandoned their place. And when his work was done, when his vibration matched the realm beyond this one, he didn't die. He transitioned. That isn't a story to admire. That's a blueprint to embody. Because everything Enoch saw, everything he touched, everything he became, was meant to show us what's possible. That you can live in this world without being bound by it. That you can move through this life not in fear of judgment, but in alignment with the higher laws written into your very being. That the divine isn't some throne in the sky, it's a current you tune into when you strip away everything false. His message is buried under centuries of doctrine for a reason. Systems survive on dependency, not empowerment. Enoch's story tears that structure down. It tells you there is no middleman, no priest, no ritual, just you, your inner knowing, and the courage to walk a path very few are willing to. The path of remembering, of realigning, of reclaiming your place in the divine order, not as a follower, but as a conscious participant. You weren't born to wait for a savior. You were born to become a light, a bridge, a frequency that uplifts the collective. And that journey doesn't require a temple. It begins where you are, with the questions you're already asking, with the discomfort you feel when the world tries to sell you certainty, and your soul whispers, "There's more." Enoch didn't escape the world. He fulfilled his purpose in it, and then he evolved beyond it. You can too, but you must start by letting go of the story they wrote for you, the one that says you're small, broken, lost, and unworthy. That story was engineered. You don't have to carry it anymore. You are not lost. You are waking up, and the more you wake up, the more you'll start to see the signs, the synchronicities, the ancient truths rising back to the surface. The more you'll realize Enoch's journey was never just his. It was a seed planted in time, waiting for a generation brave enough to follow it. This isn't a coincidence. You didn't land here by accident. You're here because something inside you knows what the world has forgotten. You're here because the veil is thinning, and you're finally ready to walk through it. The age of remembering is now. And Enoch's path, the path of truth, of elevation, of inner mastery, is still open. If you're serious about this journey, Insights Academy is where it continues. We share what can't be said publicly, including your free Kybalion ebook, a guide to hermetic principles that mirror Enoch's teachings. Sign up while it's still available. The truth is, the story was never lost. It's been living inside you this whole time, waiting to be unlocked. The man who walked with God was just the first to remember. Now it's your turn. Take the step. Walk the path. Light the way. Because your soul didn't come here to conform. It came here to evolve. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."